Hi, this is Ela Jarvis, and I am demonstrating how to do a swatch test of all the colors in your palette. So here I have the Cotman palette. These colors above here, these are all the colors that came with the set. I have attached them to the palette using hot glue. You could also use that blue tacky stuff. And I've added a few colors of my own that I like to the set as well. You can buy these little squares at Blick or anywhere online that supplies art supplies. And also, if you want to add a few more colors, you can also just squeeze a little bit out of a tube and let it dry in the palette on the top where we mix colors. All of these down here I also mixed, just squeezing some wet paint into those little blocks. So that's kind of a cool thing to be able to do. These are half pan size. Like I said, this is Cotman. I recommend Cotman sets for beginners. It's good enough quality. The colors look really good. And one thing I like about Cotman is that they you can find out the actual pigments that are used in the colors, and that's true for most of the better quality brands. And another clue to kind of let you know what pigments they're using are, you can see I've written out all of these color names. They match up the layout of these first two rows on the top. This is Viridian Hue, right? Now, Viridian is an actual pigment that paint is sometimes made out of, but it's very expensive. And like I said, this is Cotman. This is student grade. This is the student grade version of Winsor & Newton. Winsor & Newton also makes a professional quality line, but this is not it. This is the student line. So Viridian Hue, when you see hue written like that, that means that this is not actual Viridian. It means that they are trying to approximate the Viridian color with cheaper pigments. So I looked up the code, the pigment code, and I found out that this is actually phthalo. So it's PHTHALO. There's actually a phthalo blue in this set as well. And, you know, if you look around at different companies, actually have another finished a swatch of white nights. And over here, there's an emerald green. They call it emerald green, but I was able to look up the pigment number on this one. I think it's PG7 or PGR7. And it's the same pigment for both of these colors. You can see that they look rather similar. They're not identical, but they're very close. They're both very bluish greens, not really colors that you see in nature. So, you know, it's interesting to do a little research. And so if this was actually Winsor & Newton brand, not, you know, the professional quality, not the student quality, it would actually have Viridian as the pigment as opposed to phthalo blue. So, interesting piece of information there. If you wanted to move up to better quality brands of paint, good brands include Sennelier, and this is contains all of the different colors. It has the B symbol because the binder, the stuff that holds the paint to the paper, is actually honey. So here's a bunch of information, but here we've got this whole chart. And it's very small font, but it actually says at the very, very bottom, there are these, here's phthalocyanine blue. They actually have PB15.3. Sometimes there's more than one number code for a color. There's different phthalocyanine blues, also known as phthalo blue. So, you know, there's all this information about each color. Here it is, how light fast it is, you know, how opaque it is, how granulating it is, how transparent. So that's one company. I also like Core brand. Here's a little, this contains what's called a dot sheet. And I've used up most of the paints, but some companies will give you this for free. Some you can buy. a big piece of paper with little blobs of dried paint, which you can dissolve and use in a painting, which is what I've done with this one. But even here you can see PY154. That's the pigment used in that yellow. So interesting bits of information from the better quality companies. This is professional. And one more I'll just show you real quick. This is Daniel Smith. This stuff is expensive, but it's really, really nice quality. And you can see they have like over 200 colors here. And this sheet gives lots of information about each and every one of those colors, whether or not they're staining, granulating, how light fast it is, so on and so forth. And what I find is that many student or cheap brands don't give you that information. So it's like having a really good list of ingredients, you know, on a package of food. You want to make sure that you have you get what you want in a product. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint some very intense color onto the left and then some clear water on the right, and then I'm going to let them blend in the middle and between. And I'm going to do that using 2 containers of water. So this is my dirty one, this is my clean one, and my clean's got a little bit of blue in it, but it'll still work all right. The idea is that when I rinse out my brush, I'm going to use this one. If I want to add a little bit more water to my palette, I would use this one. Or if I just want to get some clean water on my brush. But this is where I'm going to dump most of the pigment I don't want anymore in here. And I also have a rag that I'm going to use to dry off my brush as needed. You can also use a paper towel. So I'll try and keep this close so you can see what I'm doing. So I've labeled all of these. This next one is Cadmium Yellow Pale Hue. So this is a very light yellow, and it's a hue, so it doesn't contain cadmium in it. It's just imitating what cadmium yellow pale looks like, and it's rather expensive. Cadmium is expensive, hence why they're not using actual cadmium. I have already gotten water on all of these previously. I might put a little bit more on as I continue on this, but you know, let it soften up. And I have a lot of paint in my brush. You can see the tip of my brush is yellow. That's especially because this is a rather opaque color. The colors that are more transparent, that look more black when they're in here, they might not show up on your brush as much. But I've got a nice layer of yellow there, and I'm rinsing my brush out, and I tap it on the bottom of the container just to really make sure that I'm knocking all that pigment off. And I can stir it around in my clean water, make sure that my brush is really clean. And I have a fair amount of water. I'm not wiping it off too much because I want to apply a bunch of water to the right side of this rectangle. And I can connect the 2 sides together. So I'm just doing some horizontal strokes to connect the 2 together. So now I can see the full range of this color from the most intense to all the way to white. So it's a way to see the full range of these colors. Another thing I'm going to point out with this is that, and I'll do another one of these just as a demonstration, when you're applying the paint, and I'm going to go for the cadmium yellow hue, so this is more of a medium. It's very similar to the last one, but just a little bit deeper. When I'm applying it, I don't want it to be a puddle. I can see it's wet, it's shiny, there's no white spots on there at all, but I can also still see the texture of the paper. If I tilt this, I don't know if you can see it, the texture of the paper is visible, and this is rather textured. There's a lot of texture to this paper. Rinsing it out in my dirty, give a final rinse in my clean. I'll show with the water what you don't want to do, and I'll remove it before I let anything bad happen. I don't want it to be so wet that it's just smooth and shiny on the surface. That's too much water, and it will overpower the paint over here on the left. You want them to be about the same level of wetness. And if you get it too wet, and I can dry this off on there to kind of soak up that excess. So I dry my brush on a paper towel or a rag, and then I touch the paper, and now they match. They're about the same level of wetness. And now we can have some osmosis, right? A little science in there. The more concentrated the paint wants to move into the wet part, the clean part. So we're getting familiar with all of these colors in this palette, and the colors don't look the same on paper as they do in the palette. Clearly, you know, you can see how dark that is versus how it looks once it's finally there. And we're just going to go, I'm going to finish all of this up eventually, and then we're going to start mixing colors and finding out more ways that these work. And this is a chance also to memorize the names of all these colors. These are colors that you would see over and over again in most palettes. You know, the cadmium yellows and cadmium reds are really common. Alizarin crimson is one that you're going to see a lot. It's a kind of a deep blood rose red. Ultramarine blue is a purplish blue that's really wonderful and useful for painting skies. Phthalo blue, as I mentioned before, shows up a lot. It's inexpensive, but it's very beautiful and kind of a brilliant bluish green. And if you have phthalo blue, you can make phthalo green. If you mix these two together, excuse me, you can make that color. You will make that color. So I hope that was helpful. And oh, one more thing. Don't make these small. That's one of the things that people often do when they first start painting, is they get nervous and they make everything very small. And the problem is then you can't really see what you're doing. You're making it harder for yourself. These are 1 inch tall and about 1.25 inches wide. And that's enough room to really be able to explore what each color really looks like. Okay, hope you enjoyed this. Bye-bye.